Everybody's seeing the screen with the slide on it.
Yep.
Okay, good. I feel like, over 40, I still don't totally get what people are seeing when I share, especially when my screen goes blank on me like that. All right, so I'm Erica Dunn. I am the Director of Design with Greenhammer, and I'm here today to talk a bit about zero energy buildings, but also how they can have an impact on strengthening our communities and why that's so important for resilient futures. So a little bit about Greenhammer, as soon as I figure out how to move the slide forward. Let's see, there we go. Okay, so Greenhammer is a design build firm in Portland, and we have been focusing on zero energy buildings for about 15 years. The company is about 19 years old altogether. Our mission is to inspire the evolution of our living environment by creating buildings that promote health and protect the planet. And our vision is a future where all buildings support the health of communities and a thriving natural world. And we are a B Corporation as well. And we are currently building our 4th zero energy community, which is at Rose Villa, a senior living community in the Portland area. And we have some others in design as well, which is really exciting. So why do we need to get to zero? Usually at this point in a presentation like this, I start talking about esoteric things like carbon and parts per million. But for anybody who has lived in Portland in the Pacific Northwest over the last year, there have sadly been a number of physical examples of why this is so important. This obviously is September 2020 of last year, and then less than 6 months later, we had this ice storm that caused incredible damage across the city, knocking out power lines for weeks. One Greenhammer person did not have power for 2 weeks. He borrowed a generator from a friend who's a Burning Man person. So he had power to run his computer, and he would show up at meetings. And at every meeting, he'd have like one more layer of insulation on his body to keep himself warm through that whole period. And then not 4 months later, we were on the other side of that, which was record-shattering heat. So obviously the goal behind getting to zero is reducing our impact on the environment, reducing our carbon emissions, and decarbonizing our grid so that we can power our buildings in a way that is sustainable. And I should also say that when we talk about getting to zero, what we're really talking about is net zero energy. So all of these projects are still grid tied, and that means that they are overproducing power in the summertime and underproducing in the winter, and over the course of a year, then they will zero out. So that's considered net zero energy. So the 3 things that we think about when we're doing that, one is to set the goal and design build to zero. And what we mean by that is that getting zero energy is our baseline. So when clients come to us, they're not necessarily saying they want a zero energy building, but that is what we design and build for them. Because we're design build, we are early on having the budget as part of the conversation as well. And so because of that, we can make sure that the budgets are there for the elements that we want to make sure are included in the project associated with zero energy. And then we also say design build to zero, because it's definitely, you can design a great building as an architect, but if you don't have a contractor who understands how to build one, there can be problems with actually getting to zero. And we are a design build firm, but I think that there are other kinds of contractual relationships that can be created between architecture firms and construction firms. It's a matter of having the two working together as a strong team, and that they both have a deep understanding of how to get to zero, or that they both have that goal for getting to zero. The next strategy that we use is using Passive House, which is a building certification system that comes out of Germany. Passive House US is now, it's known as FIAS, is a more local entity that is, it's a way of certifying a building as being very low energy. We don't always certify all of our projects to Passive House, but we use their strategies for how to get to zero. And that has to do with the overall building enclosure and the types of building systems that we're putting into it. So that's heating, cooling, and ventilation. And then once you've done that and you've really driven down the energy load of the building, you then offset that energy with on or off-site renewable energy generation. And that typically for us is solar energy. And I should also say that all of these projects are all electric. So we keep natural gas out of our projects. Obviously oil, nobody really is using that anymore, but we keep all other means of fossil fuels out of the project so that we can truly be zero energy with the renewable energy that we're generating on the buildings. So to talk a little bit more about what that passive house approach means, it means creating an airtight building. So usually we're down around 1 air change per hour. Your more standard construction is maybe around 10. So it's about 10 times more airtight, using all LED lighting in the building, having what we call a super insulated envelope. So meaning high levels of insulation around the entire building. And a major component of that is actually having some exterior insulation. So not just in the wall cavities, but on the exterior. Part of that same super insulated envelope are triple pane tilt turn windows, which are windows that have very high R value. So they are actually able to prevent the transmission of heat across them, as well as being very airtight because of how they function. And then once again, you've driven the need of the building down very low in terms of its heating, cooling, and ventilation. And so you're able to use very low energy using systems for heating, cooling, and ventilating. So just for any of the geeks in the room, our exterior walls, and we use exterior insulation on all of our projects. That's what you're seeing here. It's the mineral wool. And then the insulated walls are about R30, and that's usually with a 2x8 wall. We use trusses typically for our roofs and have about an R70 up there. So usually about 2 feet of dense packed cellulose. Underneath any concrete slabs, we are usually insulating entirely underneath them to an R18. So that's about 4 inches of insulation foam underneath. And then here's an example of those triple pane tilt turn windows. So it has to do with the fact that they're triple pane, but also the locking mechanisms that tilt turn windows have really allow you to create an airtight envelope. And then we tape our sheathing as our air barrier, which you're not actually seeing in this picture now that I realize it. And so then as you've driven all of that down, we now use very low, all electric and very low load systems for heating, cooling, and ventilating. So the ventilation is often through a heat recovery ventilator. And that means that within this system here, actually in this machine, there are areas where the exhaust air and the incoming air are passing each other. And it's about 1/4 mile overall of pipe that's running past each other. And that allows the heat to transfer between the two. So if the air inside is warmer than the air outside, it will transfer that heat to the incoming air and warm it up the way you want it to. If the air outside is hotter than the air inside, it'll happen the other way. So that the air is always coming in right around the temperature of the space that you're in. And that's critical because when you get to an airtight building, if you don't have mechanical ventilation, you actually can create sick building syndrome. So the mechanical ventilation is a really, really important part of a passive house building. And then we use typically mini split heat pumps. This is a type that many people have come used to seeing that actually attach to the wall, are called ductless because there are no ducts running to it. It's just right there on the wall. And there's typically an outdoor unit associated with it. We also do use a ducted version of this, which is hidden away. So if you don't like something on the wall, it doesn't have to be there. Just people have started seeing these more and more, I think, in hotels and such. And so maybe the question is why passive house? And the reasons that we really like it is that because it is airtight, you are and then is mechanically ventilated, you are controlling where that outside air is coming into the building. And when you do that, it allows you to filter that air so that you get very good indoor air quality. It also reduces peak energy demand on the grid. So if you can imagine if we just all built our buildings to code, but then put a whole lot of PV on the roof. In the wintertime, those buildings would still require and demand as much heating as they always did, which means that our utility grids would still have a very high peak demand at those worst moments. And when that happens, it means that our utilities have to build more power systems. And the goal is really to take more power stations offline, to not need as much, to be able to get rid of the coal that is part of our electric grid. And so by super insulating, you're reducing that peak demand, and that allows us to require less of our utilities, which means we can take offline some of those more polluting systems of generating energy. So that's a really critical piece of why Passive House is important. And then the other piece of that is a built-in resiliency. So because you have the super insulated envelope, when the outdoor temperatures are either extremely hot or extremely cold, if you were to lose power and not be able to heat and cool your space, it would take a lot longer for those to get down to a temperature at which there would be an impact on you living in the space. You could lose power for a couple of weeks before it ever got down to around 60 degrees, which is still warm enough to be living comfortably in your home and not be in trouble. Add to that the solar panels on the roof and the ability to add a battery backup, and you have even more built-in resiliency for the project, because the buildings use so much less energy that it would not take as much energy to keep them functioning. You couldn't run everything off of that battery, but you can run enough to really keep them as a functioning building for you. And I want to touch a little more in depth on this idea of the indoor air quality, because I know on days like today, it can seem like, well, indoor air quality, what does it really matter? Outdoor air quality is pretty good. So if that's coming in to my house, not that big of a deal. I think there's two things there. One is that as that air is coming into your home or your building through places that you're not intending it to come through, it's actually picking up allergens and other things that you don't want in the air in your home. So if it's coming through the walls, through leaks and cracks, it's passing by all of that insulation, it's passing by the dirt and dust that has accumulated over time in those cavities. And so that reduces the indoor air quality of your home. And then when you have things like last year's smoke in 2020, it becomes imperative that you have healthy indoor air quality. So the map here on the left is from a company called Purple Air, which creates air sensors. They're very obviously well used. You can see how many people all over Portland have them in their homes or other buildings, checking the air quality within their home. And last year, when we were in the worst of it, when you came to the Purple Air website, every one of those dots was in the dark magenta. I mean, it was basically everybody's indoor air quality was what the outdoor air quality, which was horrific, except that at the time, Stefan Aguirre, who owns Greenhammer, was living in Tillamook Row, one of our projects that I'm going to talk about momentarily. And he has an air sensor in it, or had an air sensor in it. And he was one of about 2 green dots in the entire city. And he did have to add an extra layer of filter onto that system that he had, but we've since started modifying kind of what we're doing in our projects so that that additional filter can be added. You don't want to keep it on all the time because it uses a lot more energy to pull air through a tighter filter. But during an extreme case like this, he was able to change that filter out to a MERV 1516 in order to be able to actually filter out the smoke. So he actually had healthy indoor air during that extreme smoke event. And this is particularly great, I think, for the schools that we've worked on and things like that. So, you know, it's a really critical point and becoming more and more so here in the Pacific Northwest, unfortunately. So I'm going to shift gears just slightly and talk a little bit about, you know, Greenhammer has done a lot of the single family detached homes. And one of the things that we have started really focusing on is more community-based zero energy projects, because even at the single family home level, it's going to take us a while to actually get to the point of reducing our carbon and our impact on the environment. So we started focusing on this housing type called missing middle housing, which is a type of housing that covers everything from like a duplex up to a multiplex. And it is not what we've been seeing happening all over the city of Portland, which are the sort of 4 levels of apartments over a single level of commercial. Those are really that mid-rise building. But it's the smaller scale projects that are more multifamily than a detached home, but less than a mid-rise. And usually they top out at about 30 units, maybe in a development to be considered missing middle housing. And what's so great about these projects is that they are a way of densifying our cities and our neighborhoods in a way that is still in character with the neighborhood. And so you can have more people living in a smaller footprint without it feeling like you have a 5-story building right next door to your single family home. And some of the things we like about missing middle housing are that they really create walkable, transit-oriented neighborhoods. One of the things that I think is really important to understand is that, this idea of the 20-minute neighborhood that Portland has, it really relies on having a density of, at a minimum, about 16 dwelling units per acre. And that is really about where the missing middle housing starts. And if you go to more single family residential neighborhoods, you're really in the 3 to 6 dwelling units per acre. So it makes those smaller local businesses harder to sustain. They promote affordability through smaller, well-designed units. So you'll see at Tillamook Row, we have some 4-bedroom apartments that are in the 1,300 square foot range, which is a very efficient way of building, a very efficient way of having a whole family live in a smaller size space. And because the square footage is less, even with the cost per square foot, it can be a less expensive unit to either rent or buy because it is smaller square footage. And then because you're living in these sort of a maximum 30 unit communities, you actually get to know everybody. When you get to that mid-rise scale, you almost don't know your neighbors because it is almost too many people. And so at that 30 unit level, you really are starting to get to know your community and starting to develop a sense of community resiliency because you do know your neighbors. So let me jump into the case studies here really quickly, and I'll move through these relatively quickly so we have time for a little Q&A at the end. So this is Tillamook Row, which is a project in Northeast Portland, and it's 16 units, and those units are a mix of 1 bedroom, 1 bath, all the way up to 4 bedroom, 2 bath units. And they're anywhere from 750 to 1,300 square feet. So they are efficient spaces, but that range allows for a diversity of people in different phases of their life living in Tillamook Row. All of the ground floor units have, well, I should say all of the units actually have a ground floor bedroom to allow for people to age in place. And we have about 96 kW solar panel arrays on the units themselves. So some of the shared amenities that they have, there's a common house on in the project. I'm just going to go back one. Whoops, went the wrong way. Hold on one second. Let's go back in here. Okay, so there's a common house that everybody is able to share and use. And in there is a gym, there's an EV charger in the parking area. There is vegetable gardens that everybody can use. There are also, you can see here, the rainwater catchment system that allows for irrigation of rainwater. And then this outdoor courtyard space, which has really become a real amenity for them, particularly during COVID. So this was a photo that was sent to us by one of the tenants of the development, showing sort of that picture perfect social distancing. This was actually early on in the pandemic. And they told us how grateful they were to have this courtyard, that they were able to socially distance, but still remain in contact with each other and really have a sense of community, even during such a difficult thing of the isolation of COVID. So the next project is called the Oaks at Rose Villa. And this is, Rose Villa is a senior living community in just south of Milwaukee. And it is, it's a great organization that creates neighborhoods within their campus for senior living housing. And so on this particular site, we developed 12 units that are all 2-bed, 2-bath, and around 1,200 square feet total. And you can see kind of the organization. It's all the same triplex in each of these locations, and then centered again around a central courtyard and with a 73 kW solar array on the site. And they also have, as I mentioned, this shared courtyard, and the whole site was organized around this oak that's peeking in on both of these pictures, which was a historic oak that we wanted to save. And that's where the name of the project came from. But again, this idea of having this shared outdoor space, and you get the opportunity to really interact with and engage with your community and your neighbors. And then the last one is also going to shift gears just a little bit, because this type of building is not just for housing, it can also be for schools. So this is a New Day School, which is a preschool here in Southeast Portland, just off of Clinton, that we did a major renovation to create a zero energy preschool for them. So it started with deconstruction. So you can see we basically took the whole project down to essentially the exterior walls and the structure there, did a major seismic upgrade on the project, and then came back in and did a super insulated envelope on the building, all new mechanical heating and cooling systems and fresh ventilation to create a classroom building for them. So the site is actually two buildings. One, we did this major renovation to, and the solar that's on it is 45.5 kW, and it actually is enough to offset all of the energy use of the adjacent classroom building as well. And just a little bit of picture. This one we finished just before COVID, so we've not been able to really get in and get more photographs of it, so I apologize for that. But you can kind of get a sense of sort of these classroom spaces and some of the items that we were looking at as part of it. So really looking at natural ventilation, again, use of LED lights, focusing on heat recovery ventilators to bring in fresh air while not losing the heat to the building. So I want to also touch on like how does zero energy really build community? And to me, there are a couple of things that it does. One is when you have that shared goal of trying to reach zero energy, it creates a point of conversation or something that you can all rally around and gather around. So at Tillamook Row, we have this dashboard that basically shows everybody how their energy use is doing over the course of a week. And if you are, everybody has an energy budget. If you're staying within your energy budget, the bars stays yellow. If you are trending like you're going to surpass your budget, it will actually turn red before you've actually surpassed it, so that you have the opportunity to talk to your neighbors who are in the blue, who are doing a good job, and finding out what is it that they are doing to keep their energy use low. Also, because of how these buildings are set up, each unit doesn't have their own solar panels. It's one, or rather two large arrays that are drawing all the power together into a single kind of power fund, if you can think about it that way. And so it allows people to really be working together towards that goal, as opposed to just being focused on my house, my solar panels, and I'm staying within my budget. And then the other one is this sort of shared sense of reliance. So often on these projects, there's a resiliency center aspect to it. As I mentioned, when you have a super insulated building, you're able to ride out extreme temperatures a little bit easier, even without power. Often they will have a battery backup associated with them. That's true at both Tillamook Row and New Day, so that they are able to power some of their functions even when the grid is down. Shared rainwater collection, so that could be drunk in an emergency. It's mostly intended for irrigation, but it is clean rainwater. And so in an emergency, you could have access to that water if our water system was down. And then also community food gardens. Most of our projects have some associated planter beds for raising vegetables. So if there's a problem with the food system and there are delays in getting food, you have access to fresh fruit and vegetables. So I think it's also really important to know that not everybody's going to move from their home that they're in now to a community like this. So even if we build more and more of them, there's still things that we do need to do to existing buildings in our own homes. So I wanted to give everybody kind of an idea of what some of those things might be, so you can think about them and how you might incorporate this into your own life. So the first is going electric and decarbonizing your home. And so for the same reason that we are don't put natural gas into all our projects, getting yourself off of natural gas, I think, is a really critical thing. There's a great organization called Electrify Now, and their website is there, electrifynow.net. They have a fabulous webinar series on all the ways that you can decarbonize your home, all the ways that carbon impacts the environment. And so it really gives you very direct things that you can do, like going to induction cooking as opposed to gas. That also has the nice side effect, speaking of induction, of reducing the, improving the indoor air quality. Burning natural gas in your home is a terrible thing for indoor air quality. And so going to an induction cooktop is a great way to just improve your indoor air quality there. If your home is not already insulated, insulate with dense packed cellulose, which can be blown in from the interior or the exterior. It is not only helpful for insulating your home so that you can, again, ride out those change exterior temperatures a little bit better, but also helps to create some better air tightness than what you would normally have in an older home. Next step up, I would say, is if you are able to replace old leaky windows, and if you can get to triple pane, all the better for that air tightness. And then the last one would be installing solar panels on your roof. I think it's really important that we do all the things to bring the energy use of our homes down first, and then put the solar panels on our roof. And solaroregon.org is a great organization that can walk you through how to do that, things to think about. And then I just wanted to give kind of a plug for 2 events that are happening next week. During Sustainable Building Week, there is going to be a virtual tour of the New Day School project that will go into much more detail about it than what I was able to touch on here, and will include some of the faculty from New Day talking about why they chose to go that direction. And that is on Friday at 12:15, and it's a free Zoom meeting. And then the other thing is, next week, there is also, as part of Sustainable Building Week, virtual and in-person solar tours of several homes, and also one of the communities that we most recently built called Going Street Commons. And so on Tuesday and Thursday, I think it's at 10 a.m., 10 to 11, there are virtual tours of all those places. And anybody who wants to actually see them in person, Saturday from 9 to 2, there is a self-guided tour. So you can actually walk through, talk to the folks who are living there, find out what they did, and learn more about how to get to zero. And that's it. Thank you so much. I don't know if anybody has any questions that came up. Oh, good. Somebody just ordered their induction range last week. Excellent. Our clients, even those who come initially saying we don't want to do induction because they're big cooks, they end up loving induction. Usually they do a little research and then decide this is the way to go, and they're really excited about it. So
Eric,
question.
Yeah, I was just going to let you know that we've got a question in the chat from Michelle. She's wondering, she said this was so cool. Do you often convert older buildings to zero energy buildings, or do you have to completely deconstruct the building like the New Day School?
You don't have to completely deconstruct. Often if there's seismic stuff, or if they're making a big change to how they want to use the function, that can sometimes be the most cost-effective way to do it. But there are things like an air tightness system called AeroBarrier, which is basically in an existing home, you set off this thing that basically releases this agent that blocks all of the places where air is coming through the building. So it's intended for renovation. We're also about to do a renovation of a home from the 20s, where we're actually building a new wall to the interior to get the depth that we need for insulation. And so it's a 2x4 standard old 1920s home, and we're putting a 2x4 wall on the inside to really drive that energy usage down. I will say, it's not, if you do have to do a pretty invasive renovation to get down to zero, but it can be done, and you don't have to deconstruct the house to do it. I would love to have solar on my roof, but I have too many trees around me. Is there anything else you recommend? I think there are actually ways that you can buy solar that is going on somebody else's roof. I'm not as familiar with that, but I feel like I have heard about that. If my email address If that person wants to email me, I can do a little bit of looking and see what I can find for you, because I'm pretty sure I have heard of those programs. It's very simple. I'm just Erica, ERICA, at greenhammer.com, which is all one word. I have a friend who lives at Tillamook Row, and we've hosted a cycling team party at the group space. Love the concept of the entire place. What you said about the open courtyard socially distanced during COVID was totally true. Oh, good. That's so great. I'm so excited to hear that. That always warms my heart when I hear about people actually using the space the way we are hoping that they would. Any other questions? I know that was a lot of information fast.
That was fabulous. Thank you, Eric. It was good to see it applied in a couple different circumstances so people could see how it might apply to either businesses or facilities they own, they work in, or we live in. So folks, we have about another 10 minutes or so for additional questions. If you have some, feel free to pop them in the chat. I can also fill some time, as Erica and I were preparing for this, we were talking a bit about the fact that Oregon has a number of older homes. So many of our Portland metropolitan area homes are coming up on 75 years old or more. And I'm wondering if you could talk to us a little bit more about, the power of the B Corp movement is to come together around tough issues. When you're looking at individual decisions for your house, aside from the sort of energy smart incentives under that kind of package that arrives at your house to enable you to upgrade your shower head to low flow, kind of embarking on changing your whole house footprint seems like a really big project.
Yes.
What should folks think about, or how do you begin contemplating this, from a logistics and cost perspective? Yeah, absolutely. I would highly recommend the website that I mentioned, the Electrify Now, just in terms of how to reduce your footprint in terms of natural gas and ways that you can get off of that and be on the grid. I will say that the Pacific Northwest has one of the cleanest electric grids in the country, and is, I believe, trying to be a zero carbon grid by 2050. I want to say they're trying to get all of the coal and everything off of that so that we are carbon neutral in our grid. And so just getting to electricity as opposed to natural gas is a big thing, which doesn't cost that much to replace a stove or a dryer, things that typically might be causing that use of natural gas. Thoughts on wood stoves? There's a question I saw come up through. I just want to touch on this real quick. So wood stoves are, in a passive house, they tend to overheat the space because they put out so much heat when they are on that they are actually not a good way of trying to heat a passive house, because they will overheat it quickly. They also, because it is a burning quality, it can create indoor air quality issues, even if it's not a passive house. So wood stoves, I think, are a difficult thing. I know from some people try and use pellets with them that are supposed to be more efficient, but I know that there are problems with those environmentally as well. And so really anything that is combustion based is not good for indoor air quality. And so we tend to stay away from them and not recommend them for our clients. And then mini splits do actually work in cold climates, but we will also, if we're working in a place that has very cold climates, we'll often do an electric resistance heater as a backup. So there's really cold days where you cannot quite get the mini split to bring the temperature up to what you need. You can have a little bit of infill with that. And then, yes, somebody mentioned, Karen, thank you. Energy Trust of Oregon has good info for homeowners about reducing energy use and incentives associated with it. And I would say too, if you are interested in putting solar on your roof, really, some people are still thinking about solar hot water, but for the most part, most people have moved away from that and are just focusing on solar panels, which are generating electricity rather than heating water on the roof. And part of that has had to do with incentives, but also just the cost now of doing solar on your roof is just so much more effective and cost effective, and that people have not been focusing as much on the hot water heating in that regard. But I would also say, in terms of older homes, as I mentioned,
insulating them is actually not that expensive. They can come in within a day or so, drill the holes and fill all of your stud cavities with insulation. It's one of the probably least expensive things that you can do, and have a pretty minimal impact as well in terms of the physical nature of your house. Like plugging those holes and painting is what you have to do. So if you're getting to the point of needing to repaint your home, you can have them come out, do the insulation, they drill the hole out, and then they put it back in. And so you basically just paint over the top of it, and they mostly disappear at that point. How about electric instant hot water? So we tend to try and use mini split hot water heaters in our project, and those are readily available on the market. We've found them to be more effective than the electric instant hot water in terms of meeting the hot water needs of the buildings. The issue with the electric instant is just how much it can generate at a time. And that they're really point sources. So now you have a lot of mechanical equipment all over the house, whereas mini split heat pump water heaters are very efficient, but they produce a lot of water in any given moment. And so you'll need one piece of equipment. We try and make things as simple as possible for our clients in terms of maintenance and things like that. So a mini split is, I am not the science person, so I'm going to preface this with that statement. But a mini split essentially functions kind of like your refrigerator. So it doesn't generate heat, it moves heat from one place to another. And it has the ability to move heat even at very low quantities. So even when it's kind of cold outside, it can actually still pull heat from the outdoor air to then generate the heating and cooling that you need on the inside. And that is about the best I'm going to be able to explain, because I am not a science person, but they are very efficient and they work really, really well.
So Erica, I'll give it another second or so to see if somebody else has a question. Otherwise, I'm curious, you talked a lot about roofing installation, what type of windows are best. What kind of flooring should folks be thinking about in our climate? I took a tour of a house once that had an earth floor.
Oh, that's interesting. Mm-hmm. So on all of our projects, usually our ground floor is concrete slab on our new projects, because when you insulate underneath it, you bring that mass basically to the inside of your building. And that also helps you sort of ride through these temperature changes. And so that mass is warming up basically to become the same as the air temperature in the space. And if you were to lose power and not be able to heat your home for a while, that mass will actually slowly start to give that heat off to the house itself, into the space, and keep you warm and allow you to kind of ride out a cold period. So if you're building new, doing a slab on grade is a great way of getting some thermal mass into your home. Then the flooring that you use on top of that is sort of your choice. It can be wood, it can be marmoleum, it could be tile, anything that you want on top of it. If you are in an older home, the thing that I would say is making sure that you are insulating the space between your foundation and where your floor joists stop. So it's called the rim joist, basically. We all have these floor joists that are sitting on top of concrete walls for our home. In some places that's a crawl space, in some places that's a basement. And if you go down into either one of those spaces, most likely you will see that there is no insulation there. Even if you have insulation in other parts of your walls, you might not have it there. And that is a major point of air leakage and thermal transfer that happens. So insulating that space is actually really important and not very expensive to do. Although a little dirty if you're in a crawl space.
Probably full of spiders at this time of year.
Yeah, exactly right.
Well, that's a great tip. Thank you. Yeah. I'm glad I asked. Does anybody else have any other questions? Otherwise, we can wrap, give you a couple minutes, and then don't forget to head back into our main stage. You're going to hear from our incoming board chair in 2022, Cal Moody.
Cool. Thank you all so much. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Erica. This was fantastic. Really
My pleasure.
Appreciate your time to our community.
All right. Thanks. Bye, Mike.
All right. See everybody back in a bit.
Bye.
Bye.